The days following the wedding were a blur of emotions for Chamaka. She had never expected her wedding day to end the way it had. What should have been one of the happiest moments of her life had turned into a cruel public spectacle. The words Choke had spoken to her at the altar, his callous dismissal of her beauty, replayed in her mind over and over again. She could still feel the sting of them, a deep, aching wound that wouldn't heal easily. After the shocking confrontation, her mother, Gozi, had been her rock. Gozi had held her tightly, whispering that she was beautiful and that she deserved better. Chamaka clung to her mother's words like a lifeline. She didn't know what her future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never let a man like Choke define her again. Days passed in a blur. Chamaka had turned off her phone after the wedding. The constant buzzing from Choke's calls and messages was unbearable. She had received dozens of them, texts, voicemails, and missed calls. Yet she had found the strength to ignore them. He wasn't worth it. She had made the right decision, hadn't she? But one afternoon, as Chamaka was sitting in her room, her phone buzzed again. A text message from Choke. She stared at the screen, her heart sinking as she hesitated to open it. His name glared back at her, and for a moment she felt weak. The temptation to respond was strong. She had always been someone who tried to please, someone who tried to fix things. But something inside her told her not to. Not this time. She opened the message cautiously. I was wrong at the wedding. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. Let's talk. You know I didn't mean what I said. Chamaka's hands shook as she read his words. Her mind raced. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that his cruelty was just a moment of stress or frustration. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Choke's words hadn't been just careless. They were deliberate. He had spoken them with contempt, as though she were nothing more than an object to be discarded once he had no further use for her. How could she trust someone who had publicly humiliated her? How could she go back to him? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a missed call from him. The messages kept coming, each one more pleading than the last. I didn't mean it. Let's talk. We can fix this, he wrote. Chamaka closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the wave of emotion that ate her. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. She had been in love with him once, or at least she thought she had. It was hard to reconcile the man she had imagined spending her life with and the man who had called her ugly in front of everyone. She turned off her phone again. It was the only way she could keep herself from giving in. But the silence felt deafening. The house, once filled with the excitement of wedding plans and family gatherings, was now eerily quiet. Chamaka stayed in her room most of the day, pacing, trying to collect her thoughts. She needed time. Time to figure out who she was without Choke, without the expectations that had weighed on her for so long. Time to heal. Her mother, Gozi, was a constant presence. She knew Chamaka was struggling, but never pushed too hard. Gozi was there when Chamaka needed her, offering comfort, making her favorite meals, and gently reminding her that she deserved better than what Choke had given her. Gozi, too, had been shocked by Choke's words at the wedding, and she knew that Chamaka's heart was broken in ways that were hard to explain. The woman she had raised was strong, but even the strongest of women had their breaking points. Gozi understood that this would take time. The next day, after another sleepless night, Chamaka found herself staring at her phone once more. Another text from Choke had come through. She opened it with a sigh. Please don't do this. I can't imagine my life without you. I was just stressed, that's all. I never meant to hurt you. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him everything, how hurt she was, how his words had shattered her self-worth, how his cruelty had crushed the dreams they had shared. But she didn't. Instead, she set the phone down and walked away. The pain was still fresh, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the past. She had to move forward, even if it meant facing the uncertainty of an unknown future. As the days turned into weeks, Chamaka began to feel the weight of her decision. At first, it had seemed like the easiest thing in the world to walk away from Choke. He had humiliated her in front of everyone, and that was something she could never forgive. But as the days went on, the reality of the situation sank in. She had left behind a life, a dream, a future. She had left behind everything she had known. But with that, she had also gained something: freedom. For the first time in a long time, Chamaka was living for herself. She spent the following days in a haze of mixed emotions, working to heal from the emotional trauma Chioke had caused. Her mother, Gozi, remained a constant source of support. Chamaka wasn't sure how she would have gotten through those first few days without her mother's presence. Gozi didn't push her to talk or act any differently. She simply let Chamaka feel her feelings, whatever they were, in her own time. But as much as Chamaka tried to focus on the future, she couldn't shake the memories of the wedding day, the sound of Choki's voice, the cruel words he had spoken still ran in her ears. She had been prepared for a wedding day full of joy, but instead it had become a moment of public humiliation. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there at the altar, his eyes scanning her like an object, appraising her like a thing to be used and discarded. Still, the days were getting easier. She found solace in small things: a quiet walk around the neighborhood, time spent with friends, and even rediscovering her love for painting. Chamaka had once spent hours painting, her brushstrokes a way to express everything she couldn't say. But Choke had never understood that about her. He had always viewed her passions as secondary to his own needs, as though they didn't matter. Now, for the first time in years, Chamaka was rediscovering herself. She was remembering what it felt like to live without constant judgment, to be yourself without having to please anyone. But as much as she tried to block out the noise from the outside world, Choke's voice still echoed in her mind. His messages continued, relentless and unyielding. They began to arrive more frequently, growing in intensity. At first, they were pleading, soft, apologetic, as if he were trying to break down her defenses with kindness. But soon his tone changed. The sweetness in his messages turned to frustration. He was no longer asking for her forgiveness. He was demanding it. Chamaka, I don't know why you're doing this. We can fix this. I was just stressed. Don't throw everything away. The messages felt like daggers aimed at her chest. Every time she saw his name on her phone, her stomach twisted into knots. He wasn't asking for her forgiveness because he truly understood how wrong he was. He was asking because he wanted to reclaim control, to make her believe that it was her fault for walking away. But Chamaka refused to respond. Every time she opened her phone, she had to remind herself that she was stronger than this. She had chosen herself, and she wasn't going to let him manipulate her back into a relationship where she would be just another trophy on his shelf. She had spent so long trying to fit into a mold that didn't belong to her, trying to be what Choke wanted, trying to be the perfect bride, the perfect woman, the perfect partner. But now she was reclaiming her own identity. Despite her efforts to ignore him, Choke wasn't finished. He didn't give up easily. His calls started to come more frequently, interrupting her quiet moments. He would leave long, rambling voicemails, his voice growing increasingly desperate. You're making a mistake, Chamaka. You're the one who's being unreasonable. Why are you doing this? I can't live without you. You know that. His words cut through her like a blade, each one digging deeper into the vulnerability she had worked so hard to protect. But Chamaka knew that his words were nothing but empty promises. Choki had never truly loved her, not in the way she needed to be loved. His love had always been conditional, always dependent on her compliance with his needs. Now that she had finally asserted herself, he was losing his grip, and he was willing to do anything to regain it. In the following weeks, Choki's efforts escalated. He began to reach out to Chamaka's family and friends, trying to turn them against her. He started calling her mother, telling Gozi that Chamaka was making a mistake, that she was being too emotional, too dramatic. Choke made it sound as if Chamaka was being unreasonable, as if her hurt and anger were just passing emotions that would fade with time. But Gozi knew better. She had raised Chamaka to be strong, to be independent, to know her worth. And Gozi wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Choke, tell her daughter that she was wrong for standing up for herself. One afternoon, Gozi sat Chamaka down in their living room. Chamaka had been avoiding the conversation for days, but her mother could see the pain in her eyes. Gozi gently explained that it was okay to be hurt, but that she needed to stop letting Choke's words dictate her happiness. She told Chamaka that the love she had for Choke wasn't real love. Real love didn't make you feel small. Real love didn't try to control you. Chamaka listened, but her mind was elsewhere. Choke's persistence was wearing her down. It felt as if he was always there, like a shadow looming over her, waiting to reclaim her when she was vulnerable enough. That evening, Choke showed up at her door. Chamaka had been expecting it, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of him standing there, so confident and arrogant, as if he were entitled to her forgiveness. He looked the same as always, handsome, well-dressed, and with that smile that had once made her heart flutter. But now she saw it for what it was, a mask hiding the true nature of a man who thought he could control her. Without a word, Choke pushed past her when she opened the door, making himself at home in her space. It was a power move, an attempt to assert dominance in her own home. Chamaka's heart raced, but she steeled herself. She had been here before, hadn't she? She had spent so much of her life trying to please him, trying to be the woman he wanted. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She couldn't be. Chioki didn't seem to care about the silence between them. He spoke as if nothing had happened, as if his words at the wedding were just an unfortunate slip-up. You know I was wrong. I shouldn't have said those things. I don't know what came over me. But we're meant to be together, Chamaka. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Chamaka's mind screamed at her to shut the door, to walk away, to finally rid herself of this toxic relationship. But the part of her that had always wanted to fix things, the part that had always tried to be the good daughter, the good fiancée, the good partner, felt the pull again. She was torn. Could she really walk away from everything she had ever known? number. She couldn't go back. Chamaka stood her ground, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She told him to leave, that she wasn't going to tolerate this anymore. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her again. Choke, for once, didn't argue. He left without another word, and Chamaka, though shaken, felt a small spark of relief. It had been 2 weeks since the confrontation with Choke, and though Chamaka had begun to regain a sense of peace in her life, she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he wasn't done with her. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart skipped a beat, even though she had long since silenced his number. His presence loomed over her, his attempts to reclaim her heart relentless and exhausting. Every message, every voicemail, every call was another reminder that she had made the right choice. But the temptation to return to him still lingered in the quiet moments when she found herself second guessing her decision. The days were quiet, but they weren't easy. She had started going out more, running errands, reconnecting with friends, and even considering taking a short trip to get away from it all. She needed to clear her mind and find a space where she could truly breathe, free from the shadow of the past. It was in these moments of stillness that she realized just how much she had been living for others, trying to meet their expectations, trying to be the woman everyone else wanted her to be. But now, for the first time in years, she was living for herself. She was healing, but healing was never a linear journey. One evening, after spending the day at a small art gallery, Chamaka returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and no one had been invited. She hesitated at the doorway, her mind racing, and then, before she could stop herself, she entered. Standing in her living room, hands folded in front of him, was Choke. The sight of him was enough to stop Chamaka in her tracks. She froze in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. There he was, standing as though he had every right to be there, his presence filling the room with an energy that made her want to run. His clothes were impeccable, his hair perfectly styled, as though he hadn't just barged into her life again uninvited. His eyes locked onto hers with that same self-assured, almost predatory look he always wore, as if he expected her to welcome him back without question. "Chamaka," he said with a faint smile, the kind of smile that had once made her heart race, but now only felt hollow, a facade covering his true intentions. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." For a moment, Chamaka stood there, her mind struggling to catch up. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand that he leave, but another part of her, the part that had been trained to be passive, to try to keep the peace, felt the old pan of guilt rising within her. She had always been the good fiancée, the good daughter, the one who kept quiet, the one who didn't cause trouble. But this time, she couldn't afford to fall back into those old patterns. She wasn't that woman anymore. "Choke, I've told you before," Chamaka said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I don't want to talk to you. You need to leave." Choke didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Chamaka, don't be like this. We both know that you're just hurt. This whole thing, it's been blown out of proportion. We've been through too much for you to just walk away like this. You're angry, I get that. But don't make a decision that you'll regret." His words had the same smooth, persuasive tone that she had once fallen for. But now they felt hollow. He wasn't interested in understanding her pain. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to manipulate her into thinking that her emotions were irrational, that she was being unreasonable, and that the only way forward was to return to the toxic relationship they had. Chamaka felt her hands clench into fists at her sides. How dare he? How dare he stand there and tell her that her feelings were a mistake? She wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. No, Chioke, she said, her voice sharp, her gaze unwavering. You don't get to make this about me. You don't get to twist this into something I need to apologize for. You called me ugly. You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of my family, my friends. You treated me like I was nothing, and you expect me to just forget it? To pretend it never happened? Chioke's expression flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. I was wrong, I admit that. I wasn't thinking straight, I was stressed, but that doesn't mean we can't fix this. We were good together, Chamaka. I love you. I don't want to lose you. Chamaka shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Love? You don't love me. If you did, you would have never said those things. If you loved me, you would have respected me, not used me as some trophy to show off to your friends. You never cared about who I was, Choke. You only cared about what I could do for you, how I could make you look good. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. Choki seemed to be processing her words, but his expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, and Chamaka could see that the facade of confidence was slipping. Chamaka, please, he said again, his voice now a little more desperate. I made a mistake. We both know I'm not perfect, but we can work through this. You just need to let go of your anger and come back to me. Chamaka's chest tightened at his words, but this time, instead of succumbing to the familiar guilt, she felt a surge of clarity. She had been through so much already. She had fought for so long to make him happy, to fit into the mold he had created for her. But she was done. She wasn't going to let him define her anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially not him, dictate her worth. Choki, this is over, she said, firmly, her voice unwavering. I'm not coming back. You've shown me who you really are, and I'm done with it. I deserve better than this. Choki's face darkened with frustration, but Chamaka didn't flinch. She had made a decision. There was no turning back now. Without another word, Choki turned and walked toward the door. He didn't say anything else, but Chamaka could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just a physical departure. It was the end of the chapter she had been holding on to for far too long. She had finally closed the door on him. For good. As the door clicked shut behind him, Chamaka let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion, but more than anything, she felt free. The emotional weight that had been dragging her down for so long was finally beginning to lift. She was free of him, and more importantly, she was free to be herself again. She stood there for a moment, savoring the silence that followed. It was the first moment in a long time that she could finally hear herself think. For the first time in years, she was living for herself, and she was going to keep it that way. The days after Chioke's departure felt like a breath of fresh air. Chamaka didn't realize just how heavy the weight of his presence had been in her life until it was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she could breathe again. His attempts to manipulate her, his constant pressure to return to him had drained her. She had spent so much time questioning herself, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Now she no longer had to do that. The answers were clear. She had done the right thing. She had chosen herself. The silence that followed Chioke's departure wasn't filled with regret or sorrow. It wasn't the kind of silence she had feared, the kind that made her doubt herself. Instead, it was the kind of peace that came with knowing that she had done something for herself, something that was long overdue. Chamaka had always been the person who tried to make everyone happy, who tried to meet the expectations of her family, her friends, and even Chioke. But now she was beginning to understand the importance of living for herself. In the days that followed, Chamaka rediscovered parts of herself she hadn't realized she had lost. She began to spend more time with her mother, Gozi, who had always been there to support her. Gozi never pressured her to speak about the pain she was feeling, but she was always there, offering gentle encouragement whenever Chamaka needed it. It was Gozi who reminded her that the pain of the past didn't define her, that she was not the woman Choke had tried to make her into. She was Chamaka, strong and independent, and it was time to remember that. Chamaka also reconnected with her friends. Ada, her best friend, had been a constant source of support throughout everything. Ada had been the one to remind her that Choke's words were just a reflection of his insecurities, not her worth. Ada had never questioned Chamaka's decision, even when others did. She was always there, ready to listen, to offer advice, or just to sit quietly with Chamaka when words weren't enough. With her mother and Ada by her side, Chamaka began to piece her life back together. She took up her painting again, finding solace in the brushstrokes that allowed her to express what she couldn't say. The art had always been a part of her, but it had been stifled during the years she had spent trying to be the perfect partner for Chioke. Now she painted freely, without judgment, without fear of not measuring up to anyone's expectations. But as she focused on rebuilding her life, the pressure from society continued. People around her, family members, acquaintances, even strangers, began to question her decision. It was inevitable. Her family had been expecting a grand wedding, a union between two influential families, a fairy tale ending. Instead, they got a broken engagement, a public humiliation. There were whispers at family gatherings, and the judgment was palpable. The elders especially didn't understand. They were concerned for Chamaka, worried about what people would say about her. Some were even critical of her decision, urging her to reconcile with Chioke, to salvage what little was left of the good match she had been given. Chamaka heard their words, but she no longer felt the need to please them. She had spent her entire life trying to meet the expectations of others, but now she was learning to live for herself. She was learning to trust herself again, to believe in her own strength. One day, after a particularly long week, Chamaka decided to go for a walk. The weather had been beautiful lately, and the quiet streets seemed like the perfect place to clear her head. She wandered through the neighborhood, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. For so long, her life had been centered around Chioke, around the idea of marriage and family. But now, for the first time, she didn't have to worry about what others expected of her. She didn't have to worry about living up to anyone else's standards. She was free to be herself. As she walked, Chamaka thought about the things she had given up over the years, the dreams she had set aside, the passions she had neglected, the parts of herself she had buried to fit into someone else's life.